And so I have a few questions for you, Bob. You and I have known each other for a while. In addition to the Deep Change Field Guide, which we use in this course, there's the original Deep Change book, which I'd actually like to combine the two as we talk today. But I was just looking on my bookshelf, Bob, to see what I had. There's the classic Quinn and Cameron, Competing Values, Diagnosing Change and Changing Organizational Cultures. And I happen to have the Quinn and Quinn Lift text, which was terrific. And then I think this is your latest, Positive Organization, which you came out and spoke to our faculty about at the Huntsman School. So thank you for all of the interaction you've had with us and the Huntsman School. Bob, as you think about, and it's been a while, kind of the genesis, the origin of the Deep Change book, tell me just a little bit about, I'm curious if you can identify where that kind of idea germinated, what spark came, and how it even started as an idea in your head.
That's a great question because there was much history to the germination of that idea. I worked in many organizational consulting situations where people were dealing with problems of various sorts, with people on individual kinds of issues in their lives. And over time, something started to become very, very clear to me, and that was that both for individuals, groups, and organizations, the universe is constantly calling on us to make deep change in some aspect of our life, our group, or organization. And a deep change is different than an incremental change. An incremental change is logical, it's controllable, it's reversible. A deep change is transformative, and it's requires an enormous commitment. It requires belief, and means moving forward on faith, basically. And we like to pretend that all the changes in the world are incremental, and much of administrative theory orbits around that. But the truth is that much of our life orbits around transformation, that there are evolutionary processes everywhere that lead to transformative kinds of changes. And when it comes to human beings, and we're facing one of these things, the natural reaction is denial. And as individuals, we're masterful at denial. When you put us in a human group, the entire thing escalates. When there's something at stake in a human group and there's a need for change, the group has an enormous capacity to resist and to redefine and to deny. And the result is that both as individuals, groups, and organizations, we constantly flip into the pattern of slow death. When I'm not making a change I need to make, I start to wither. And you look across the world at any given moment in time, and we have people in powerful positions who are withering all the time, but pretending that all's well. And if you look across a classroom and a group of peers as a student, they all look like they're so smart, and you're the only dumb ones, the student in the room, when in fact they're all struggling in their lives with some major issue that they may or may not be admitting to. And so as that became clearer and clearer, it almost began to own me that I needed to write about this topic. And so that was kind of the history and evolution of that idea.
Bob, have you actually seen people do deep change? I've seen a lot of people attempt and not succeed, but can we really do this?
Um, yeah, I think that what you're saying about seeing so many people who don't seem to be able to do it is a very justifiable position. I think the opposite position is also justifiable. That is, um, we see people making deep change all the time. Um, One of the places where it's most obvious is in the research on post traumatic growth, where we have some kind of crisis in our life. The doctor says, I'm sorry, it's cancer. The boss says, I'm sorry, we're downsizing. Um, Someone says, I don't want to live with you anymore. Um, we all face crises all the time. And because it's a crisis, we can't get away from it. We can't get away from the cancer. We can't get away from the person saying they don't want to live with us anymore. And when we go through those crises, the first natural reaction is fight or flight. And so we either become angry and bitter or we get down in the fetal position. In both cases, the consequences are negative. And so either we stay there or we get up and we start to move through the change process. And if we do, we engage in transformative learning. When we begin to succeed in that transformation, um, dramatic things happen. Um, we see ourselves in a new way. We realize that we have potential inside us that we never thought we had. Um, we begin to feel good about ourselves because we see our potential unfolding. And when we start to feel good about ourselves, we look at other people, and this is very significant. We see in them potential they don't see in themselves. That's when we really become a leader. Um, is when we experience our own discontinuities, work our way through them, and begin to see a bigger vision. In fact, in 1977, Zalesnik wrote a very important paper where he offered that hypothesis for the first time. It was met with enormous anger. People just thought it was a terrible idea. Today, when you look at the literature on post traumatic growth or spiritual conversion or various kinds of learning, they all suggest that he was right, and that deep change happens all the time. It happens to individuals, it happens to groups, it happens to organizations. Um, but you have to have eyes to see it, because it's like when I did a literature review with Carl Weick once, we wrote a paragraph that said, when you look at an organization, what you see depends on the instrument you look through. If you look at it with a telescope, you see one thing. And if you look at it with a microscope, you see something very different. So, for example, if you look at an organization with a telescope, what it appears to be is long periods of stable patterns and then a sudden, dramatic transformation, and then long periods of stable patterns. If you look at the same organization through a microscope, then what you see is constant change every minute of every day, every phone call that comes in, every person that's hired or fired, every major decision that gets made. That system is being stimulated in some way, and it's adjusting. So if you look at it through a microscope, you see constant incremental changes. If you look at it through a telescope, you see stability and then a transformation, stability and a transformation. But change is going on all the time.
Bob, what would you say is the main thesis of deep change?
Well, the thesis is that it happens. More importantly, you and I can become conscious of what's happening. And we can look at our lives, and we can make more intelligent, better decisions, and find the courage, the faith, and the other virtues necessary to face these changes. Furthermore, we can learn to help other people go through these changes. That's actually the essential claim of leadership. People distort leadership heavily. They think of a leader as someone who holds a position. He's our CEO, he's our leader. She's our dean, she's our leader. Because someone holds a position doesn't make them a leader. That's a hierarchical definition. A leader is somebody who has influence and is able to move people through an actual change process. And some CEOs aren't leaders. They have the authority, they have the power, but they don't have the influence. And holding a position does not make you a leader, it makes you a manager. At the heart of leadership is the ability to create an image or a vision of the future, to attract people to that vision, and then most importantly, to build their faith or belief in themselves that they can enact their way into that desired future. So whether you're trying to get your school child to learn math, or whether you're trying to get the people who work for you to adapt to new technology, or whether you're trying to move the entire country, the dynamic is the same. And it comes back not to them, where all leadership literature points, but to you as a leader. And so the thesis of deep change is, number one, you can change yourself, and number two, you can help other people change themselves as well.
Bob, have you had anybody push back on this thesis that you just described? And are there folks that disagree with these ideas?
That's very interesting. You know, there's a lot of stuff I write that people push back on violently. No one has ever pushed back on the validity of the argument. What happens instead is they make arguments so that they...
I'm going to interrupt you, Bob. And again, the argument is?
That deep change is real. There's a requirement to make it, and you can do it.
Okay.
And if you're a leader, you have to do it, and you have to help other people do it. So the pushback is not in the content of the argument. The pushback is people come up with excuses, arguments that are excuses, so that they don't have to do it. Because this is a terrifying thing to people. That's why the message is so important, is because it is terrifying, and because we do live in denial and rationalization all the time. We externalize because we're terrified. This message says courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the ability to move forward in the presence of fear. And my job is to help you find the courage to do that. And your job is to help the people who work for you to find the courage to do that. That terrifies people who have no idea how to do that. It's actually a pretty rare skill. You can go to theology schools where you think, well, there they would understand how to build belief in other people. Well, they don't have any idea how to build belief in other people because it doesn't come from cognitive learning. It comes from personal experience and from learning by faith.
I'm going to be very authentic with you as I think about how this might apply to me right now. I have a sense that there are things that I should be changing that perhaps I haven't consciously focused on, that perhaps are terrifying me. But as I think about it just right now, I think of a lot of other people who need change, and I don't really see myself what I should focus on. How can, is that part of the problem?
I think you just put your finger on a universal phenomenon that every one of us should be able to identify with what you just said. That is, I have no problem seeing what changes my wife needs to make, my children need to make, the people at work need to make, it's so obvious, right? And yet it's absolutely true that I don't need to really make any changes. I seem to be okay. Um, and that is a very, very conventional stance to be in. And that's the whole challenge, right? Is when you and I feel that way, or someone else feels that way, and yet they're suffering, or the organization is suffering, how do I help those people embrace the truth?
And so, I do feel myself bumping up against walls all the time, being frustrated, and maybe part of that is a clue to me of where I might look for some opportunities for self redefinition and change.
Well, the interesting thing
Maybe my
is,
boss sees all the things I need to change, my colleagues, my students, um, and maybe that's why I'm feel like sometimes I'm punching against the jello as a quote leader.
yeah, um, the truth is that every one of those people you just mentioned does know, but they don't tell us because we send signals that are nonverbal but very clear. Don't come into my zone of comfort and bring the truth to me.
Yeah.
Don't tell me what I need to do. Now, that's why we have the phrase, feedback is the breakfast of champions. If you really care about what you're doing and how to get better, then you love feedback. Most of us hate feedback. And we say, give me feedback. And they see our lips move, but they see those arms fold and they know this is 10 times more authentic than the lips.
Yeah.
And so we spend our lives signaling to people to not give us feedback. And that leads to, I think, a very crucial point. And that is most people live in stagnation unless they find a purpose. And when they find a purpose that matters and they commit to it, that's when real learning starts. My friend Jim Lure is a sports psychologist, and he once posed a puzzle that I think is very powerful. He said, let's imagine a woman who smokes. You decide to tell her the truth. Smoking is correlated with cancer, and you're literally choosing to kill yourself. These facts seem to have no influence on her. She continues to smoke. So you say, look, I'm going to help you some more. I'm going to give you a patch to put on your arm. We're going to treat this biologically. She does. She's still smoking. So you say, I'm going to take you to a support group. She goes through that and she's still smoking. He says, now give me 3 words that as soon as you utter them, this woman will find the strength to put down her cigarette and never smoke again. Now, there were several of us there. None of us could think of the answer to this puzzle. And then he gave us the 3 words. You are pregnant. And the moment she hears those 3 words, she goes over, puts the cigarette in the ashtray, and stops smoking. Where did the strength come from when it was so inaccessible? Well, number 1, it was always in her. Number 2, the moment she had a purpose that was bigger than she was, a reason to make a sacrifice, she's able to do things she couldn't do before, and she begins to enter what for her would be a process of deep change. Most of us live in our comfort zones. We live in a reactive mindset, not a proactive mindset, and we're not learning. We're engaging in everyday incremental learning, but we're throwing away the very opportunity of our life, which is to improve our time while in this life. What does that mean? It means that every moment I have more capability than the last moment. That's when my time improves. And so the notion of purpose has preoccupied me for the last 10 years because it's absolutely connected to this process of deep change.
Well, you've given us the thesis of the book. You've given us, I think, 2 or 3 ideas that come out of the book as far as how do we do this. I'm going to take a real quick sidetrack, and then I want to come back to this. Why the field guide? Why the deep change field guide?
Um,
That's the book we're going to be using.
right. There was a, that's an interesting story. The publisher wanted to do a second edition of Deep Change, which meant basically updating it. I began to actually do that and started to put the manuscript together. And the publisher said, well, I think that it makes sense to turn this into a field guide, um, which meant simply some differences in formatting and so on and so forth. Um, I said, fine, it's up to you. And so they made that decision. And that's how it turned into a field guide. It could have been a second edition of Deep Change. And maybe sometime I'll do that anyway. But that's how it turned into a field guide. I might mention, because a lot of people don't see this, but for your students, they'll read the book, they'll probably get something out of it. But I would strongly recommend to them, for their own, not for grades, not for anything else, but for their own profound deep learning, is to take the movies in the book and make sure you watch every one of them with a notebook. If you watch those movies with a notebook and at the end ask yourself, across these very different stories that I've been able to watch in detail because they're a video, I can see them with my eyes, it can have profound impact on your life. And many people have had that experience. So I would just recommend it to them to keep that in mind.
Thank you. I'd just like to end with one last question, then maybe some final thoughts, Bob. But how can we as professionals in this program, what would be 2 or 3 suggestions that you would give us so that we can implement these ideas long term, so that they can become a part of us?
I guess the first thing that comes to my mind as you ask that story is an image, a story. A few years ago, I listened to a talk on gratitude. I thought, that's a great talk. And then about a week later, Kim Cameron at the University of Michigan gave a lecture on gratitude where he went through all the scientific findings about the benefits of gratitude. And I was astounded. I said, one of the best lectures I've ever heard. In both cases, I did absolutely nothing. I just admired these 2 great presentations. Shortly thereafter, I was sitting waiting for a meeting to start, and there was a woman in the meeting, and she made a statement. She said, I kept a gratitude journal for 18 months. And everybody went, oh. And she said, and then I quit. And we all went, oh. She said, no, you don't understand. And then she told the story. She said, my father was the most negative man who ever walked this planet. She said, and I was his daughter. If I went to a concert, and it was a great concert, but they hit one bad note, what I talked about for weeks was the bad note. She said, and then I ran into this research, and I decided to try it. And within a few days, the change in my life was so potent, I began to try to persuade my husband and children to do it. She said, and then for the next 18 months, I kept a gratitude journal. The reason I quit, she said, is I now live in a constant state of gratitude. The interesting thing is I had only known her for a year or so. People who had known her 10 years before would uniformly say to me, oh, she's so negative. How can you stand to be in the same room with her? In my experiences, I've never heard her express one negative thought. That is, I know this incredibly positive human being. So if you stop and just pause for a minute and think about that story, here's a woman making a claim that her entire brain has been rewired from being an extreme negative human being to becoming a positive human being. What an amazing claim that is. that her brain could be rewired through a conscious process of choice. Now, the interesting thing about that woman is I continue to see her. Um, her learning is explosive. She's now a global citizen. She goes all over the world, does strange things, all in the name of growing and learning, having more impact, I think, than she ever imagined she'd have, and studying things and getting into things that she would have never dreamed she would have. Um, the message of deep change in the end is every human being, no matter who you are, no matter what your life experiences have been, you are full of potential. You have a very short time on this earth. And if there's one purpose that's clear, as I look across philosophy, religion, and science, that purpose is human growth. We are here to grow as much as we possibly can and to contribute as much as we possibly can to the growth of others. Until you learn to make deep change in your own life, you underperform that potential. And it would be a thrilling thing if every one of your students came to understand and believe that.
Bob, thank you for your time today. This has been such a precious gift that you've given us. I know how busy you are, and I also want to just thank you for the friendship we've had over the years and the impact you've had on my life. And on behalf of my students and the Huntsman School and our dean, Doug Anderson, who I know is a dear friend, I want to just say thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Brad. It's just an honor and a delight, and I just hope your students have a great experience.
Thank you. Take care.
All right.